793 AD, the North Sea. The water is cold, gray, and completely unforgiving. Out of the fog come the longships, low to the water, fast, almost silent except for the rhythm of oars pulling in unison. Each ship carries 60 warriors who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this: raid, overwhelm, vanish before anyone can respond. The Viking Age is just beginning, and the men rowing these ships are about to make the rest of the world understand what that means. At its peak, a coordinated Viking fleet runs 300 longships. That is 18,000 warriors moving across open water with a speed and coordination that no coastal kingdom of the 9th century can match. They don't fight fair. They don't hold territory. They strike, they take, they disappear. Every defense built against them assumes they are coming. They come anyway. But let's change one thing. Somewhere in that same gray North Sea, barely visible against the horizon, is a USS Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, 1,092 feet of floating airbase, 100,000 tons of steel, a crew of 6,000 sailors and aviators operating 90 aircraft from a flight deck that is longer than the tallest building in the 9th century world is tall. It carries enough aviation fuel and ordnance to run continuous combat operations for weeks without resupply. Its radar sees everything on the surface of the water within 200 miles. Its aircraft speeds the human cannot track. Its defensive weapon systems fire faster than any human can aim. So what happens when 300 Viking longships meet one aircraft carrier? This is a 2 a.m. thought experiment, not a simulation, but I think it is the most interesting version of this question, so let's run it properly. The carrier knows the longships are coming before any Viking lookout has spotted the carrier. The E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, a propeller-driven plane that carries a rotating radar dome above its fuselage, is already orbiting at 25,000 feet, invisible from the surface, painting a complete picture of every vessel moving on the North Sea within 300 miles. 300 longships in coordinated formation appear on its display as 300 individual contact tracks. Speed, heading, formation structure, which ships are leading, which are flanking, all of it visible and updated in real time. The carrier's Combat Information Center has a complete tactical picture of the Viking fleet before a single longship has closed to within 100 miles. The Vikings have no equivalent. Their intelligence is a man standing at the bow of a ship looking at water and fog. The first decision the carrier makes is what not to do. It does not launch a strike immediately. 90 aircraft carrying air-to-ground missiles against wooden longships is not a tactical problem. It is a math problem, and the math ends in about 40 minutes. That is not the interesting question. The interesting question is whether there is any scenario, any approach, any adaptation the Vikings can make that changes the outcome at all. The answer is almost certainly no, but let's give them every possible advantage and see how far they get. The Vikings push forward. They have seen strange things before. Storms, sea monsters in the accounts of older sailors, lights on the water at night. A massive shape on the horizon that doesn't move and doesn't have sails is strange, but strange things on the water do not stop Viking raiders. Strange things on the water sometimes mean opportunity. The lead longships close to 50 miles. The carrier launches 2 F/A-18 Super Hornets on a reconnaissance pass. Not armed for strike, just to look. The 2 jets descend from altitude and pass over the longship formation at 500 feet and 600 miles per hour. The sound arrives after they are already gone. To the Vikings on the water below, the experience is incomprehensible. A shape moves overhead faster than a thrown spear, faster than an arrow, faster than anything that has ever moved in their experience, and it is gone before they can process what they saw. The noise hits a full second later, a crack of compressed air that rolls across the water like thunder with no clouds. Several longships lose their oar rhythm completely. Men who have raided Monastery Coast without flinching are gripping their shields and looking at each other with no tactical response available. The lead Jarl makes the only decision that makes sense in his framework. He pushes forward. Whatever that thing was, it did not attack. It left. The raid continues. This is the correct instinct for a 9th century raid commander. Press the advantage when the enemy shows hesitation. It is the wrong century. At 30 miles, the carrier launches a proper combat air patrol. 4 F/A-18S this time, armed. They begin a systematic sweep from the outer edges of the Viking formation inward. The engagement is not dramatic from the air. Longships are wooden, unarmored, and carry no weapons that can reach an aircraft flying at altitude. Each Hornet carries enough ordnance to destroy a dozen ships per pass. The outer wings of the formation begin to disappear. Ships in the rear ranks see fire on the water ahead of them. They cannot see what is causing it. There is no visible enemy, there is noise, and then there is fire. And then there is nothing where a ship used to be. The Viking response is the response of men who have never been in a situation that their entire cultural framework cannot explain. Some ships turn and run. This is rational. Some ships push harder toward the carrier, reasoning that the source of the attack must be the large shape on the horizon. This is brave and completely fatal. fatal. The ships that charge directly toward the carrier enter the carrier's close-in defensive envelope. The Phalanx CIWS, a 20mm Gatling gun that fires 4,500 rounds per minute and is designed to destroy incoming missiles. Against wooden longships at close range, it does not require adjustment. The carrier's destroyer escorts, operating 5 miles out on either flank, are engaging with their own 5-inch guns and have been for the last 20 minutes. The formation that took months of planning and coordination across dozens of Norse chieftains to assemble is now a burning debris field spread across 15 miles of North Sea. But here's where we have to be honest about what this scenario actually shows and what it does not. The carrier wins this engagement without meaningful resistance. That part is not in question. The more interesting limitation is strategic, not tactical. The carrier cannot raid a coastline. It cannot hold ground. It cannot negotiate, establish trade routes, or build the political relationships that actually ended the Viking Age. The aircraft carrier solves the problem of 300 longships on open water decisively and completely. The problem of why those longships were there in the first place and what happens to the Norse warrior culture when it can no longer sustain itself through raiding, that problem requires a completely different kind of power. There is also the question of what the surviving ships carry back to Scandinavia. Some longships on the outer edges of the formation scattered early. Their crews are alive, rowing hard for home, carrying a story that no skald in the history of Norse poetry has the vocabulary to tell. They saw a floating island that did not move. They saw iron birds that flew faster than sound and breathed fire from a distance of miles. They saw ships vanish without an enemy vessel coming close enough to board. The Jarls back home will hear this account and understand none of it. But they will understand one thing clearly. Whatever is out there in the North Sea now, it is not something Norse raiding doctrine was built to handle. Whether that stops them from trying again is a different question entirely. These are people who crossed the open Atlantic in wooden boats because they wanted to see what was on the other side. They do not have a mechanism for deciding that something is simply too dangerous to attempt. The carrier answered the tactical question without breaking a sweat. The historical question, what happens to the Viking Age when the sea is no longer a highway for the longship, that one stays open. This is a 2 a.m. scenario, not a war game, just the most interesting version of this question I could find at this hour. Extended with what the carrier cannot do. 6,000 sailors on that flight deck have been watching radar tracks disappear for the last hour. For the crew of the Nimitz, this was not a battle. It was a navigation problem with an unfortunate outcome. No aircraft were damaged, no crew member was threatened at any point. The closest any longship came to the carrier was 4 miles, at which point the destroyer escort ended that approach with a single 5-inch round. The ship's captain files a contact report that the chain of command back in the 21st century will never receive, because there is no 21st century to receive it. The carrier is alone in 793 AD with 90 aircraft, enough fuel for 3 weeks of operations, and no port anywhere in the known world capable of re-selping a Nimitz-class vessel. That is the real limitation. Not the longships, the logistics. The carrier carries approximately 3 million gallons of aviation fuel. At full combat operations tempo, it burns through that in weeks. The nuclear reactor that powers the ship itself runs for 25 years without refueling. That part is solved. But jet fuel in 793 AD does not exist. The refineries that produce it will not be invented for 1,000 years. The moment the carrier exhausts its aviation fuel, its 90 aircraft become 90 very expensive pieces of metal sitting on a flight deck. The ship itself remains a 100,000-ton steel fortress that no 9th century force can damage. But its primary offensive capability, the air wing, goes quiet. What you are left with is an unsinkable, immovable island of steel in the North Sea that can defend itself indefinitely, but cannot project power beyond the range of its deck guns. The Vikings, being Vikings, would eventually figure this out. Not the first generation, not the Jarls who watched their ships burn without understanding why, but 2 generations later, when the floating island is still there, and the iron birds have stopped flying, some Norse chieftain with more curiosity than fear would row out to investigate. And the crew of the Nimitz, 6,000 people with no way home and finite supplies, would have a very different kind of problem on their hands. The carrier solved the tactical question completely, the survival question that one the ship was never designed to answer.